Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today's guest has interests in space flight and astronomy and has recently written a hypothesis entitled the Aldebaran or the Aldebaran Project. His hypothesis can be summarized as follows. My hypothesis is that a space probe, which I will call the Ancient Envoy, was sent to Earth by advanced beings that once inhabited a place circling the star Aldebaran. Their motive was to contact another intelligent species before Aldebaran swelled up, became a red giant and destroyed their world. Possessing a high degree of artificial intelligence, the Ancient Envoy waited in Earth orbit, observing our planet. Eventually, the probe detected the efforts of a physically inept species, that's us, using its wits to gain an advantage over nature. Then, 6,000 years ago, when the first civilizations began to emerge in Mesopotamia, the Ancient Envoy released a small capsule, which I call the Messenger, to make direct contact with humans. The Messenger included an archive of information describing the species that sent the Ancient Envoy to Earth and the reasons why. Part of this archive was a goodwill gift of wisdom in the form of sciences, technologies, arts, logistics, and methods of good governance that would benefit humanity. This made sense to me because, though primitive in comparison to the Ancient Envoy, the Pioneer and Voyager probes we have sent beyond our solar system and to the stars contain archives of a similar nature. So, welcome to the show, Derek Willis.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Now then, it's a very interesting hypothesis, Derek, and just to point out first off, it is a hypothesis, and you've not got photographs of this ancient satellite. Just explain what you mean by a hypothesis first.
Well, I mean, basically a hypothesis is a series of pieces of evidence that point towards something. It's not proof positive. The whole idea of the project is to seek evidence and therefore to prove the hypothesis.
Right, and that evidence comes from several different strands, yeah. But just tell us, before we get into some of the evidence, what's your background? And because you've done some very interesting things with your own space rockets, or rockets, just tell us about your background.
Well, being of a certain age, I was born into the space age, and I remember the Apollo project and the Skylab project and so forth. And consequently, I've always had a lifelong interest in space flight, and particularly in rocketry. I also was very interested in the idea of an independent space program. So
Civilian
space program, yeah. So probably it's getting on about 20 years ago now, I started designing and building and launching my own rockets.
Because you did start a science degree, and you're now doing an astronomy degree. Just tell us about that.
Yes. I studied physics and electronics at Lancaster University, but I dropped out towards the end of second year. But about 5 or 6 years ago, I began a part-time degree at the University of Central Lancashire in astronomy. So I currently have like 2 certificates in astronomy, and over the next 2 or 3 years. So
you actually developed your own fuel for these rockets that you were tinkering with. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, there's basically 3 kinds of propellant inside a rocket. You can either have liquid propellant or solid propellant, or a hybrid, which is a mixture of the 2. And in the late 90s, I came up with this propellant which I called ASPROP, which is aerated solid propellant. And there's a matrix of the propellant, which is a solidified hydrocarbon, but inside that there's millions and millions of bubbles of compressed oxygen, which act as the oxidizer.
Right. And did you get that patented?
I put a provisional patent on it back in 1997, but because of various things that occurred, I've not really taken them much further.
And this method of propellant, was it likened to an aero bar, or that was what gave you the idea?
Yes,
just tell us about that.
Well, I was literally eating the bar of aero in my garage at the time,
right,
and saw the bubble structure,
right,
and kind of thought, well, if instead of bubbles of air there was bubbles of compressed oxygen,
right,
then it would work as a propellant.
right. So now at some point you actually got sponsorship from Nestle.
Yeah.
Because of this, that it was like the idea that you got it from a bar of chocolate. Is that why they sponsored you?
Yeah.
But so the first rocket that you built, were you being sponsored at that for the first one or not?
Well, the very first one I wasn't.
Right. So tell us what happened there, because you launched it on the moors in Northumberland, is that right? Right. Just tell us about that.
It went about 1,000 feet. I mean, it was a fairly small rocket. It was about a metre or so tall.
Right.
It's just very primitive prototype, but that led to some publicity.
And so when you launched it, did you recover it when it came down?
Oh yeah, it was on a parachute. Yeah.
It was on a parachute.
Yeah.
And did the parachute work?
Yeah, everything worked.
And so who else was there observing this first launch of this rocket then? Was it?
There was about 3 of my friends at the time,
Right,
who were sort of into amateur rocketry as
Right.
well.
Right, okay. So do you not need permission to do that kind of thing?
Well, you do. It depends on how you define the laws.
Right.
I mean, you can fire anything. Things have changed now, I should point out. I mean, back then, this is getting on 15, well, more, 18 years
97.
ago. Yeah, 1997. There were actually strict laws, but amateur rocketeers like yourself would just kind of ignored them.
Right.
Otherwise.
Right, all right. So then the publicity then brought a little bit of sponsorship from Nestle.
Yeah.
So tell us what happened then.
Well, I basically got a phone call from their PR company who said, "Look, we've seen in the newspapers and on local TV what you're doing, and there's obviously a link with Aero and Nestle. Would you like some money?"
Right.
And so I didn't say no.
And so you set up, or were involved in setting up, the Space Quest Foundation, which was like an amateur rocket society which had a workshop.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then you built a bigger rocket then, is that?
Yes. Well, we then built Aerospace One, which we flew. That there is film of it, which Nestle insisted that it was done almost privately.
Right.
Because they didn't, as far as I can gather, they didn't really want to be involved in some kind of explosion or something like that. So they wanted to know that it worked first.
I see.
So we
Covering
flew,
their arses.
basically, yeah. So we flew that, and it worked fine.
Right.
And then we built Aerospace 2, which is...
There's a third rocket. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
your
the
third rocket.
yeah.
And how high did that one go?
Well, we didn't actually properly launch Aerospace 2 because by that point we were starting to get into a bit of bother with the history of Nestle.
Right. So there was certain people who found out that Nestle was sponsoring your project weren't happy because of Nestle have animal rights people and other people protest against this corporation.
Yeah.
So that put pay to your funding, is that?
Basically, yes. I mean, we started to receive letters and emails. I mean, there weren't so common emails at the time from various animal rights organisations, basically saying, "Do you know the nature of the company that you're involved in?"
Yeah. You see, my mind, when I hear something like that, goes to the fact that could be a setup. It might not have been animal rights people complaining. It could have been representatives of NASA, for all you know, that do not want a civilian space program. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it was, but I can't imagine people who I know who are pro animal rights wanting to stop you developing a civilian space program. I mean, maybe they did, I don't know. But so one of these rockets, you got up to 5 kilometers in height, is that right?
Yeah.
All right. And so was your eventual intention to launch one and get one in orbit?
That was the ultimate aim, yeah.
So what you were doing is just developing a sequence of rockets to get further and further and learn from each one, and then perhaps build one that you could then put in orbit.
Yeah.
And would that require some kind of control system on it and navigation?
Oh yes, it would have to have a guidance system.
Guidance system.
Yeah.
So had you thought about guidance systems?
Yes, we'd designed well, they call it an inertial guidance system. It basically uses gyroscopes.
Right.
To give a frame of reference.
Right, and would that have any like direct control electronically to the ground, or would it be an automatic guidance system?
It would have been automatic,
right?
Pre-programmed.
All right, and So then, once this kind of you'd lost the funding, you were approached to write a book. Just tell us about that, Dave.
Yeah, well, I was actually approached just before we lost the funding,
right?
From John Wiley and Sons. Actually, they're just called Wiley's now, who are academic publishers, and they had asked me to write a book on the early history of rocketry and spaceflight.
All right, and Derek, we'll just hold it there because we're going to go for a short break. We're going to be hearing from more from Derek Willis after this.